International Law and the Arctic.
International Law and the Arctic is a distinctly Canadian book, but it's concerning the entire circumpolar Arctic and puts our situation in that broader international context. It's important for Canadians to realize that 40% of our country is Arctic. And our country, Canada, is the second largest country on Earth. So this is a big deal in terms of just geographic size. And with that, in terms of opportunity, only 105,000 Canadians live in the Arctic. And yet many opportunities, economic opportunities first and foremost, but opportunities to build national pride, to achieve national projects, to show leadership in terms of international cooperation, really are more present in the Arctic than anywhere else. So having sovereignty that's clearly defined enables us to ensure environmental protection against oil spills, to ensure that there's responsible fisheries management, to ensure that there is safety for Canadians and visitors who come to the north or the Indigenous peoples who live there. Well, the overriding dominant issue in the Arctic today is climate change, which is overturning entire ecosystems. It's causing ice to melt, permafrost to melt, posing real challenges to the people who live in the Arctic. There are real challenges dealing with the environmental concerns, and with that, seizing the opportunities. Because we can't solve some of these problems without other countries. We need to cooperate in a rule-based system, and we need to have clearly defined limits to our jurisdiction so that we don't rub up against other states. Well, the question of whether Canada has sufficient military capability in the Arctic is an important one. And the Canadian military has an absolutely essential role in terms of search and rescue in the Arctic. Talking about a vast region with a very low population, extreme weather, total darkness in the winter. And when accidents occur, they're very serious. And to deal with that, we need a highly capable military. We need good long-range helicopters. We need long-range aircraft. We need ships in the water, icebreakers in the water that can provide that kind of coverage. And together with the search and rescue, these same assets then provide a kind of constabulary role to guard against smugglers or illegal immigrants and other kinds of security challenges. And to be frank, no Canadian government in recent decades has really stepped up on this front, providing that kind of improved capability. To Stephen Harper's credit, he came to office talking about improvements like that, but unfortunately he has yet to deliver. Well, it's interesting because people, especially in Ottawa, bureaucrats, politicians, often complain about how expensive it would be to do the things that I advocate in the Arctic. Ports, icebreakers, helicopters, investment in health and housing and education. Billions of dollars, they say, in a region with only 105,000 people. And my response to them is that if you don't want to pay what is necessary, you should put the Canadian Arctic up on eBay and see how much China would pay for these opportunities. How many trillions of dollars a country like China would pay to have the opportunities that Canada has in the Arctic. We need to invest in the Arctic because any other self-respecting developed country would have done so by now. This is our future, and yes, it will cost money, but great dreams, great projects are worth investing in. Stephen Harper and I disagree on the issue of admitting non-Arctic countries as permanent observers to the Arctic Council. The Prime Minister is hesitant about admitting countries like China or the European Union or India to the Arctic Council as observers. And I say, to the contrary, bring them in. A regional organization is only as important as the people in the room. We're not talking about giving them membership. We're talking about allowing them to watch us and the other Arctic countries govern the region. And that is a tribute that they pay to our role by wanting to be there. So I say, yeah, bring them in. Let's make the Arctic Council more important. Let's make it the world-recognized organization for governing this region in a responsible way. Thanks to WikiLeaks, we know what Stephen Harper really thinks about Russia and the Arctic. In a cable that former US Ambassador David Jacobson wrote back to Hillary Clinton at the State Department, Ambassador Jacobson reported on a meeting between Mr. Harper and the Secretary General of NATO, in which the Canadian Prime Minister said, essentially, there is no role for NATO in the Arctic because relations with Russia in the Arctic are good. That was, I believe, just 4 years ago, and Russia in the Arctic has been cooperating very closely. Since then, we've signed a multilateral search and rescue treaty, including Russia, to respond to accidents. We've signed a treaty concerning oil spill preparedness and response, again, including Russia. And there are other things underway. I think the simple answer to those who worry about Russia and the Arctic is that Russia learned during the Cold War that the Arctic is an exceedingly expensive place in which to operate. If you want to militarize the Arctic, be prepared to bankrupt your country. This region is so large and so inhospitable that the cost of anything there is very, very high. Russia has enough problems and challenges and interests on its eastern, western, southern flanks to not worry or not want conflict in the Arctic. And I think that Canada should take the same approach. I'm not naive. I don't trust Vladimir Putin. But I believe that Mr. Putin understands that conflict and military buildup in the Arctic would not be in his interest or any other country's interests also. I wrote this book in part to demonstrate how very much cooperation there is in the Arctic already and what could be done to further cooperation on the big Arctic issues of the day. So it's a book that goes into a fair bit of detail on all the environmental issues, all the issues concerning Indigenous peoples. It goes into some of the remaining sovereignty disputes, the whole issue of the Central Arctic Ocean and the Lomonosov Ridge and seabed jurisdiction there. In some respects, if you want to understand the Arctic in terms of what's really going on between countries, in terms of their cooperation, in terms of lawmaking, in terms of how we here in Canada have contributed to all that, and we have been the leader in this region in terms of lawmaking for the last 40 years. This is the book for you. It's not a quick and easy read. It was published by an academic press and it has footnotes, but I tried to make it the definitive book on these issues. This is the best that I can do. This is all that I know. And my hope is that it will contribute as countries continue to work together. Well, the Arctic was unique in not having a regional organization because there are regional organizations for all of the rest of the world. In North America, we have NAFTA, which is a regional trade agreement, but it has a lot of content to it. In Europe, of course, there's the European Union and the Council of Europe, and there are similar organizations in Africa, the African Union in Asia. So the Arctic was unique in not having a governance organization. And in 1996, Canada realized that this was an opportunity. to create something new and to build towards a future where a regional organization could fill a truly essential role. And that was great foresight. And so now, almost 2 decades later, we've gone from an initial few meetings to a full-fledged organization with a permanent secretariat that's engaged in international lawmaking. This is one of Canada's great diplomatic successes. And its roots go back to both Conservative and Liberal governments. I would credit Joe Clark, I would credit Lloyd Axworthy as having contributed to this momentum from its early days. And we need to continue because Canada is a great power in the Arctic. We are right up there with Russia alongside the United States because of Alaska, but we are a leader, we should be a leader. If there's anywhere in the world where Canada can lead, it's in the Arctic, and as everyone knows who reads newspapers, the Arctic is quickly becoming the center of international politics. So this is a fantastic development for Canada in the sense that we are poised to make a real difference on our northern frontier. I've been interested in the Arctic since I was 3 years old because my father, who was a government scientist, went on a research expedition to Bathurst Island in Canada's high Arctic during the summer of 1969. And my first memory is of him walking across the tarmac from his airplane, coming back from the great wild north. And so it's been part of me ever since. But I think it's part of most Canadians. In some way or another, the Arctic is part of our national psyche. And it's an interesting phenomena because this national psyche extends across English and French Canada. This transcends the two solitudes, this interest, obsession with the North. And I'm a proud Canadian, and I care about this country, and I want us to deal with the Arctic in a responsible way. And that includes not just seizing the opportunities, but dealing with the challenges. And this is a challenging time and one that's ripe with opportunity. And part of doing it right is to understand the legal structures that are in place that enable us to work with other Arctic countries. And so international law is an important part of the story. It's not the entire story. And in this book, in International Law in the Arctic, I spend a lot of time putting the law in its context, in its political and economic and social context. But understanding these rules is absolutely essential if we are to seize our moment as an Arctic country, as the Arctic leader in the 21st century.
International Law and the Arctic. Written by Michael Byers. Published by Cambridge University Press.